She climbed into their car with nothing but trust in her voice and sunlight on her face. Hours later, she was naked and locked in a coffin-like box buried beneath their bed. For the next 7 years, she lived in silence and darkness as the world moved on without her. This case is about a young woman named Colleen Stan, who vanished on an ordinary spring day in 1977 while hitchhiking through Northern California. She was 20 years old, with clear blue eyes and a quiet sense of adventure. The air was warm and dry, and the wind carried the smell of pine through the roads that curved between forest and farmland. She had made this kind of trip before. It was the kind of travel young people did often in the 70s, with their thumbs out and backpacks slung over one shoulder. She trusted the road. She trusted people. Colleen was trying to reach a friend's birthday party in Westwood. She left Eugene, Oregon, and made it nearly 700 kilometers south before accepting a ride from a young couple driving a blue Dodge Colt, Cameron and Janice Hooker. They looked harmless. He was quiet and clean-cut. She was small and soft-spoken with an infant on her lap. The car was cramped, but ordinary. There was no sense of danger at first. They stopped at a gas station. Colleen used the restroom and later said a voice deep inside her told her to run, but she didn't. When they got back on the road, Cameron turned toward a logging area and pulled the car into a secluded spot hidden by thick trees. That was where the illusion ended. He forced her out of the vehicle and placed a handmade wooden device over her head. It was lined with carpet and designed to muffle sound and light. She could barely breathe. The world became a faint echo of footsteps and rustling leaves. From there, she was taken to their home and forced into a small wooden box no bigger than a coffin. The walls pressed against her body. There was no room to stretch her arms, no light, no sound, just darkness and the constant hum of household life above her as the couple lived their days like nothing was wrong. Her identity was stripped away. She became an object of control. She was fed. She was moved. She was spoken to only when commanded. In time, she was made to believe in a secret organization called the Company that would destroy her family if she disobeyed. Outside the box, the world had already begun to forget her. Her parents searched, but no leads ever came. And for the next 7 years, Colleen Stan became a ghost inside a box beneath her captor's bed, hidden in plain sight. Her story would become one of the most haunting examples of psychological domination ever documented in modern criminal history. For the first few hours inside the box, Colleen Stan could not tell whether it was night or day. She could hear muffled footsteps, doors opening and closing, the distant clatter of dishes, the weight of furniture creaking above her. Each sound reminded her that life was still happening somewhere else while she remained frozen in darkness. The air inside the box was stale and warm. Breathing became shallow. Sweat pooled along her back. Time unraveled. Minutes collapsed into hours, then days, then weeks. Cameron and Janice Hooker placed the box beneath their bed. They would lie inches above her each night while she remained curled beneath them in silence. She was only brought out to be controlled. He used a system of restraints and isolation to dismantle her identity piece by piece. He did not need to shout. He did not need to beat her constantly. He used silence, stillness, the threat of something worse always lingering. He introduced an idea, a shadowy organization called the Company. According to him, it was an all-seeing network that punished disobedience. He told her they were watching, that if she tried to escape, they would kill her family, her father, her mother, everyone she ever loved. She believed him. By the 6th month of captivity, Colleen was presented with a document, a contract. She was told to sign it. In it, she agreed to become his property, a possession without rights or voice. She signed her name with a trembling hand. It was not just a signature, it was surrender, but not weakness. It was survival. Her compliance was not consent. It was calculation, the only way to stay alive. After the contract was signed, her routine changed. She was allowed out of the box more frequently. Cameron began giving her tasks, chores around the house, cleaning, laundry. He crafted a false role for her. She was introduced to outsiders as a live-in helper, a kind of servant, but her eyes told a different story. They carried the quiet panic of someone balancing on the edge of obedience and collapse. She followed every command without hesitation, not because she wanted to, but because fear had rewired her understanding of freedom. At one point, he allowed her to visit her family. They had not seen her in years. When she stepped into their home, they were stunned but relieved. She looked thinner but calm. She smiled. She hugged them, but she told them nothing. Not about the box, not about the contract, not about the silent screams inside her mind. Her father sensed something was wrong. Her eyes seemed distant, her words rehearsed, but she insisted she was fine. She told them she had joined a group, that she was happy. They believed it because they needed to, because the alternative was too disturbing to imagine. After the visit, she returned with him willingly, back to the house, back to the box. Her family could not understand why. Neither could the world when they learned of it later, but they had never lived inside that silence. They had never breathed through a straw inside a wooden coffin for hours on end. They had never been told that their every thought was being monitored by something bigger than them. Years passed. He modified the box, made it smaller, more secure. She spent most days in total darkness, 23 hours each day in that space. Her body adapted, her mind bent, but it did not break. Janice watched everything. She was not simply a bystander, she had been part of it from the beginning. When Cameron told her he wanted another woman under his control, she had agreed. He promised not to hurt her anymore if he could hurt someone else instead. That was the deal. So she let it happen. She made excuses. She watched. But something began to change. Guilt moved in. It was slow and quiet, like everything else in that house, but it grew. Janice began questioning the narrative. She began seeing Colleen not as an object, but as a person. She saw the injuries, the silence, the fear, and she began to realize that the company was not real. It was a myth Cameron had invented to maintain control, a prison made of words and fear. Still, the box remained. Still, Colleen stayed. By the end of the 7th year, Janice had reached her limit. She could no longer justify the silence. She confessed the truth, not just to Colleen, but eventually to the police. That was the moment the illusion cracked. But before the trial, before the headlines, before justice, there was one final act. Colleen stepped onto a bus, alone, for the first time in years. No restraints, no cage, just the steady rhythm of the engine as the world rolled past her. She was free, but freedom did not erase what had come before. It only gave it a name. The girl in the box was no longer missing, but the box would never fully let her go. It was early 1984 when the illusion finally broke. For nearly 7 years, Colleen Stan had lived in silence and darkness beneath the bed of a couple who had twisted every boundary of trust and control. Each breath she took inside that box was measured. Every sound above her head was a reminder that the world continued without her. She had signed away her identity. She had internalized her own captivity. She believed in a lie so powerful that even freedom, when offered, felt like a threat. But everything changed when Janice Hooker's fear turned into guilt. For years, Janice had stood beside her husband as he manipulated and dominated another woman with calculated cruelty. She watched him engineer a world where control was absolute and the victim's will was broken by repetition and silence. But over time, she began to see what she had helped build. The walls of their home no longer felt like safety. They felt like confession. She could no longer rationalize what they had done. One night, when Cameron was away, Janice approached Colleen. Her voice was low, her face pale. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a single truth finally spoken after years of deception. She told Colleen that the company was not real. There was no secret organization, no eyes in the shadows, no punishment waiting if she disobeyed. All of it had been a story Cameron created to hold her mind captive long after the chains were removed. The words did not register at first. Colleen sat still, her breathing slowed. She stared forward into the space in front of her. Then her body began to shake. Not violently, not outwardly, but with the kind of tremor that comes from a soul being pulled out of a long fog. Everything she believed was shattered. The terror that had shaped every moment of her survival was gone, and in its place was silence. Not the silence of the box, but the silence of realization. Janice promised to help her leave. She gave her money, told her where to go. They planned a time when Cameron would be at work. The hours leading up to her escape passed in slow motion. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps returning. Every car outside made her heart spike, but then the moment arrived. She walked out the front door with the sunlight on her skin. For the first time in years, she was not being watched. She boarded a Greyhound bus. The seat felt unfamiliar. The air tasted different. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were open. She sat quietly as the road began to unwind behind her. The bus hummed. Her body remained stiff. Her muscles had not adjusted to long periods of movement. She sat among strangers who had no idea that she had spent the last 7 years inside a wooden box smaller than a coffin. She looked out the window, but her eyes did not see scenery. They saw memory. They saw walls. She did not cry. There were no tears left, only a numbness that sat behind her eyes like a weight. When she reached her destination, she contacted her family. She returned to the world she had left as a young woman, but she was no longer the same person. She spoke softly. She explained what had happened in pieces. The details were almost too strange to believe. A box under a bed, a fake company, a signed contract, a family visit with no outcry. None of it made sense to those who had never lived it, but the truth did not need to make sense. It only needed to be told. Shortly after her return, Janice went to the police. She provided a full confession. She gave names. She described the box. She described the acts of physical coercion and the control Cameron had enforced over Colleen. She handed over the contract, the photographs, every tool he had used. She admitted that she had been complicit, but she begged for immunity in exchange for her testimony. When law enforcement entered the Hooker home, they found the box. It was just as Colleen had described: heavy, insulated, barely ventilated, a small hole to breathe, a latch to seal. There was no exaggeration, no embellishment. What she had endured was real, and it had been happening for nearly a decade in a quiet California town where neighbors never suspected a thing. Cameron Hooker was arrested. He denied everything. He claimed Colleen had agreed to stay, that she had consented, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her body bore the marks. Her mind carried the trauma. The timeline matched. The contract bore his handwriting. The photographs showed more than words ever could. The court rejected his defense. Colleen took the stand. She faced the man who had taken nearly a third of her life. Her voice was measured. Her eyes rarely left his. She recounted years of control, years of fear, years of submission, not by choice, but by design. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as each detail peeled back another layer of his cruelty. At the end of the trial, the judge sentenced Cameron Hooker to 104 years in prison. There was no dramatic outburst, no moment of remorse, just a man in shackles being led away from the world he thought he controlled. Janice was granted immunity. Her role would remain controversial. Some saw her as a victim. Others saw her as something else. But Colleen was no longer in the box. She had survived something most could not begin to imagine. She had walked out of her own grave, and in doing so, she shattered the illusion that control ends at chains. Sometimes the strongest cages are the ones built inside the mind, and breaking free from them is the most brutal act of all. After the sentencing, Colleen Stan disappeared from the headlines, just as quietly as she had vanished from that roadside in 1977. There was no public triumph, no dramatic moment of healing. She went back to living, back to breathing air that did not taste like dust and wood and silence. She enrolled in college. She got married. She had a child. But none of that erased the years that were taken, the years beneath the floor, the days folded into darkness, the quiet that had soaked into her bones. The box remained in evidence storage, a rectangular shape built to mute sound and light, its edges worn, its lining stained. It was not just a structure, it was a monument to control. It had been placed beneath a bed where a man and a woman slept while she lay inches below them, listening to their footsteps and the soft shift of sheets above her. The house where it all happened still stands. The yard is ordinary. The windows reflect the sky like any other home on the street. But inside, some of those rooms no longer feel like places meant for living. There are marks on the walls that will never fully disappear, and corners of silence that feel too deep. Janice Hooker was never charged. She walked out of the courtroom and faded into civilian life. Some saw her as broken. Others saw her as complicit. She said she was sorry, but some wounds cannot be answered with apologies. Cameron Hooker remains behind bars. He has been denied parole. He still maintains that it was all misunderstood, that Colleen stayed by choice, that no line was crossed. But the evidence tells a different story. The photographs, the restraints, the years of unbroken obedience built on fear. Colleen never sought revenge. She did not demand retribution. She simply told the truth. That truth still exists in transcripts and testimonies, in interviews where her voice never wavers, but her eyes look past the camera, as if remembering something no one else in the room can feel. The world has moved on, but something in this case remains still, like the air in a sealed box, like the shadow beneath a bed that no light can reach, a life stolen in silence and returned just as quietly. Colleen visited her family during captivity and told them nothing. She smiled through dinner. She hugged her father. Then she returned to the house and stepped back into the box. No one from her family pressed harder. No one followed up. The company never existed yet. Its name was never written down, not once. Janice knew everything and walked away without a charge. She blended into the background and disappeared. Cameron Hooker had another woman before Colleen. Her name was Marie. She vanished without a trace. Her body was never found. The photographs he took were never fully cataloged. Some remain in sealed files. Some have no names. Some have faces no one could identify. The box is still in evidence. Its hinges rusted, its carpet stained. Its lid still closes perfectly.